Okay, this is my setup. I'm using an 8x10 canvas. I have the Tupperware container that has the paint on it. The paint stays wet for weeks and weeks with water inside. I just put the lid back on and the moisture inside keeps it wet. I put a dollop of the yellow ochre and plenty of the varnish, and then I use a medium-sized brush with water. Make a paste out of that, and then I'll begin moving it around. The varnish and the water keep the color wet, so I'm working wet in wet all the time, and it stays wet long enough to get the painting done. If for some reason it does dry, then you're still working wet on dry, or you can add a little varnish to the area and work back into it. As soon as this is covered, I'm going to make my lines on the canvas to indicate what my idea is. Now I have several photographs. I don't have them here, I have them in my head. All right, from online as well as photographs I've taken from up in the mountains in Oregon of water that is coming down over rocks in a wooded area. It makes a really nice look, and I want to use a sunset which isn't in any of the pictures. So this yellow ochre is going to help a lot with that, because I'm going to use a more yellow sky than I am like a cerulean blue. I'm going to have some at the top, and I'm going to have more yellow where the sun is. All right, so that's spread out pretty nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a burnt umber. I'm going to put a little bit more out. I used some last night, so I put a dollop of it there. Use a little smaller brush and some water. And I want the water to kind of come down this way. All right. So I kind of define my action that's going to happen there. And I want to indicate here where my trees are going to be, the mass of trees. So I'm going to put a large mass over here. And I just put some dark color there for now. And I'm going to put a smaller mass over here. What I'm actually going to do, this area over here is actually going to be larger, but I'm going to use some ultramarine blue and white in this area to make these trees move back in the distance. And notice I try to use a little different shapes on either side. Okay, I think I'll move that on up like that and fill that in really nice. Let that come out a little bit, lean out, get a little tension going in the trees that are leaning in a bit. All right, this area down in here is going to be rocks. Okay, so I'm going to put in some dark. It doesn't have to be too dark right now. Just some idea of where I'm going to put these rocks. But notice that my action line still remains in there. Okay, and notice how this mixes with that yellow ochre so that I get some nice golden colors, because the sunset is going to naturally reflect off the rocks, and I'm going to get that going. All right, I want to get my sky going a little bit so I can then start laying things in, because to me putting the sky in after I put in my land sometimes throws things off, because I start doing a totally different sky than what the land calls for. So I try to get some idea with what I want the land to be. So I'm going to lighten this area in here. Now this will continue to be worked, but I'm just going to indicate it for now. give myself an idea. Okay, now you notice I can actually cut some of the shapes using the sky, and I can kind of shape things a little bit. Cutting is when you paint out a dark area with a light color to create shapes that weren't there before. You're cutting the dark area away. Now I'm going to use a little bit of the cerulean, just a touch of it. And that makes a nice golden green, which would be appropriate for a sunset area. And I try to make the strokes kind of irregular so that things are moving around in the sky a little bit. All right. Now I've got that done. Now what I want to do is indicate my rocks a little bit more. I've got my burnt sienna, and the rocks in this sort of area I can put in pretty much, and then I'm going to come back with cerulean blue. I want to use a medium blue for the water because I'm going to come back and put highlights on the water, and I don't want it to be too white. I want the highlights to be a very light golden color, and the cool shadowed area of the water to be that cerulean blue, that nice blue-green color. All right, that's some burnt umber and burnt sienna. I get some nice reddish colors in there. Notice my action line still remains, and I can see it really well. Okay, now I'm going to start indicating some of the water. So I'm going to use a cerulean blue and a little bit of the white. Notice these lines are irregular, meaning one line does not perfectly echo another line. You don't want that to happen too much. You want that irregularity. Nature isn't real crazy about symmetry. Some water comes from behind rocks and flows down. There's echoes here of shapes though. Notice this shape right here, and this shape right here, and this shape right here are echoes. It's good to have echoes in your painting. Why, I don't know, but it is. I picked that up from somebody when I was in New York, having echoes. Okay, so now we're getting the basic idea. Now I'm going to use Hooker's Green Deep for the tree area. And notice it mixes now with the colors that are already there to keep it from being too dark or too intense, meaning too much its own color. I like some mix, but at the same time I like to work with a single color, pretty much direct, and let it mix on the canvas. I've actually squeezed out color onto the canvas itself and mixed it right there in the sky area or something. Now, notice I mentioned that I wanted some of these trees to go into the background, and I'm going to do that now with some ultramarine and white. And again, that yellow ochre helps to turn that ultramarine a kind of gray-green. which is really good for trees in the distance. Now what I have is I have a nice heavy over here and I have action down here. So I have a little bit of a diagonal coordination there. And over here I have a mass which is relatively equal to this over here, but doesn't look nearly as strong because I'm using contrast, dark and light, to keep it from interfering or looking too balanced. You want your landscape to move. So what you do is your eye goes up in here, it goes back in there, and then actually turns again and goes back into this distance. So you get a nice S shape going on. When you do paths into the woods, don't do a path going straight back down the center. Try to get a nice S going that appears to disappear back into the forest a bit. All right, again, I'm going to use some of my reddish brown to define some of these rocks. Now there's still plenty of nice wet paint on here. Now notice now my sky looks a little darker than it did a moment ago. So I can go in there with some gold and white. And I don't want to put it right down at that juncture. I want the sun to be hiding a little bit behind these trees. Now at the very end, I'll often go back with a small brush and watch out for big goops of paint and move them around and soften them and knock them down a little bit. Notice how it doesn't take much to pull some sunlight out of this, and that yellow ochre then shows through. I like to work my areas in middle tones. That's a dark middle, this is a light middle, so that I can always add some highlight and some dark as I move on. All right. In the distance, though, those contrasts between those things disappear more. If you notice, there's a bit of a light misty look in these pockets, which is typical for things in the distance. Now let's really lay in some of the dark in these rocks.